when you set the tire pressures you get for a setting under 250 kilometers per hour or over 250 kilometers per hour. You decide what setting you want to choose. Well, hello everyone. My name is Pedro Vela from the Revs Institute, and we are here today with Ed Bowling in the legendary McLaren F1, with which we just did 1,000 miles on. Wow.
It was amazing. We joined the McLaren F1 Owners Club tour through the Great Smoky Mountains in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee and up and back through North Georgia, and had an amazing journey. But in doing so, we learned several things that you wouldn't naturally assume about taking a car like this on a big road trip. And so today I thought I would tell you 10 things you might not know about road tripping a McLaren F1.
So, issue number one, the phones.
We didn't think this was going to be a thing, but because of the way that the glass is and presumably some kind of metallic coating that they've got on it, your phone doesn't really work inside of a McLaren F1, which navigation, especially in a group in a rally, is an issue. Now, we saw that some of the more seasoned touring owners had put auxiliary GPS antennas actually in the engine bay. And that's one of the reasons why the factory radio antenna is either by the wiper or in the engine bay. And so if you want your phone to work, even if there is reception, you have to stick it out this tiny window and then hope that it will refresh, which is a challenge. The next challenge is getting in, and the bigger challenge then is getting out. At 6.5 feet tall, this car was not necessarily built for me in mind, but once you're in, there's a good bit of room. But the way that you get in the car is that you sit towards the front of the seat, just like you would towards the front of the seat of a scissor door Lamborghini or anything like that. But then the next step would generally be to rotate your legs in, and that's where you start to run into problems. And so you'll kind of put your feet right here in the passenger compartment, and then into here, and then you lift your whole self up like this and lower yourself in right here. Now the center seat has the harnesses, which is quite a production. And generally, if your passenger's getting in, they'll have already sat on top of them, and you'll need to ask them to move. And so you sit here, and honestly, the headroom is not bad. There was one of the owners that's a couple inches taller than I am, 6'7" 3/4", he said, which is oddly specific. But his was actually had a little bit less headroom, but a little more legroom because he had a smaller steering wheel fitted. I would do that if I were to own this car, and I have spent the last week trying to figure out how that might happen. But second gear is in my leg, but still very, very worth it. Now, getting out is much harder. In fact, when we shot with this car back in 2021, I thought that I was going to have Jared Pink pull me by my torso to get out, because generally if I were getting out of a Mercy or a Diablo, the procedure would be to move your legs out first. You cannot do that. I cannot move my leg under the steering wheel at all. I cannot move my leg around the front of the steering wheel at all. And so you have to follow the instructions, which are, again, brace here, get your head out, move yourself to the passenger seat, delicately move your feet this way to not hit any priceless things, and then you're out. He's better at it, not just because he's smaller. Now the next obstacle is how hot you're going to be. When we shot with this thing in 2021 with Freddie sitting here, Tyler there in March in Florida, it was ridiculously hot. Now the air conditioning, like most 90s supercars, isn't very good. And so it honestly doesn't even blow on you. There's no cooling. And now we got out talking to the other McLaren F1 owners like, yeah, how about that terrible air conditioning? Assuming that ours was normal and functioning properly. And they're like, ours is fine. And we immediately realized we were in maybe the hooptiest of the McLaren F1s on this tour, which was quite all right. So what you have to do then is open these tiny windows, which offer almost no airflow, but oddly, with the aerodynamic advancements in this car, still gives you some fairly significant wind buffeting. Now the cure for that is for the passenger to hold their hand out the window the whole time, or your arm, just something to interrupt one side of it. You could modulate a little bit. However, obviously you've got to have the windows down the entirety of the drive in order to not sweat to death, which we still did. But you're not supposed to open the doors with the windows down because of pressure that it puts on the regulators and things like that. So every time we had to remember, put the windows up. This side wins the race, if you're curious, because every time I buy a used car, I try to have a window race to see which regulator is the weakest. This one's the fastest. And then you get out of the car. The next thing that you'll learn when you drive the car a really long way, especially if you're not in Florida where there are turns on the road, is that the weight of the steering changes drastically through a turn. Now, there's no power assist, there's no ABS, there's no traction control, there's none of the aids that we're now accustomed to in more modern supercars. But apparently, according to Matt from Lanzante, who was there to support us through this drive, the way that the upper control arm architecture works, it causes the steering under load to get really, really heavy, especially over 50 miles an hour and after 180 degrees of input. So you'll be in the middle of a turn that you've entered very nicely, very precisely, and then you really have to start wrestling with the wheel. The other thing that we've noticed is that as you go really fast, the car gets quite light. There is not much downforce for a McLaren F1 unless you have the high downforce kit, which this one does not have. Only 7 cars had that high downforce kit, at least fitted in period at the factory. And so when you go over, let's say 120 miles an hour, in theory on a closed course or in Mexico, you will notice that the steering gets very light and it kind of just moves wherever it wants to.
So the next issue is fueling. As you can see, the fuel cap is here, and the way this works is you flip this up. You can usually lock it if you did want to. We've left it unlocked just for to make it easier for everything. So you pull this out, which actually you heard that it's pressurized. It's not a good sign.
That's not a good sign. That's what you hope to not have. That was the loudest it ever did.
That's definitely the loudest. Two things that I kind of encountered when I'm fueling is not every pump automatically stopped it when I was fueling the car. So that's a little bit concerning, especially seeing, you know, this part of the engine get so hot and having the fuel there, you definitely don't want it to fall in the exhaust.
Yeah, so you have to be very careful. In fact, generally, Pedro would keep the ignition on and watch the gauge, which the fuel gauges on McLaren F1s are not terribly accurate anyway, but this one works quite well, to see when it seemed like we were getting full. And I'd say we were probably 75% of the pumps would actually cut off. But that pressurization, we think, is related to the recent replacement of the factory fuel bladders or bags with an aluminum tank. And so there seems to be an occasional issue with venting that aluminum tank, and that causes fuel starvation. So occasionally, even when you're quite confident you actually have gasoline, it will display a symptom like you're running out of gas, which for all of us that have done that many, many times recognize it immediately, where you're giving it gas and it'll start shuddering as though it's about to die. Disconcerting when it is a car of this magnitude and value, but based on the symptom, we believe that's what it is. And so there may be a need to re-architect the vent system for this updated aluminum tank. Otherwise, you just give it a little bit more gas and it cures itself momentarily. Yeah, that was a lot of pressure.
Yeah, definitely has never done that. So the next issue is the startup procedure. I'm going to take the famous McLaren F1 key, put it in the ignition switch. I'm going to turn it, and then the car goes through a systems check where it goes and reads through all the codes. So you can see here on our little display system, it says system checks. Once that's cleared and you don't get any error message other than the door open, it does display one error message sometimes that says low oil pressure, and that's just because the car is off. There's no pressure flowing through the oil system, so it detects that there's no pressure and just letting you know. That's completely normal. You also get all these warning lights if the light's open, if the handbrake's applied, which you definitely sometimes don't want to post a picture of all this because the internet will tear you up.
So once you start it, you'll let it idle and it'll let you know that the oil temperature is not prepared for you to drive it. Now generally I like kind of a rolling low RPM warm-up sequence for a car, but this car really does like to just sit there and wake up. And so you'll let the car sit and idle. And these are obviously things that no valet would ever do. And it becomes rather horrifying as the prospect of like someone else moving the car that isn't as familiar. Because we've seen people just start them up and go, and then they'll start coughing and sputtering and things like that. But if you go through all of this, then you deal with the fact that you must then leave from a stop. Whether you're going forwards or backwards, patience is required. It's much like a Carrera GT where there is a throttle position sensor and a clutch position sensor, and so as you release the clutch, it will give it enough throttle, just enough throttle, to not stall. And so you're not really supposed to introduce throttle until you're totally off the clutch, which if you're on a hill or something like that is near impossible to do, at least with the gumption that we had to withstand the temptation to just flip it a little bit. And so you'll let that out and then roll into it. And so it is not designed for a drag racing launch or anything of the sort. And yeah, patience is the key. Now the question when you're on a long road trip that you don't want to do all the driving by yourself is, what do you do with your passengers? And this is where you sit, and it's obviously very roomy. And so you're here as the passenger like this, and most of the other people that were carrying a passenger would put the second person to the driver's left, which would be like as though the car is right-hand drive. We found that to be a little bit problematic, and I did, in fact, when we had all three in for Car Trek. You've got two interior rear view mirrors, and they're right at the face of whoever is sitting in this. So it's totally worthless, because obviously my head fills this entirely. Now you do have your wing mirrors, but they're not great. And so if you are trying to merge left and there is a person here, I find it near impossible. So we tended to put the passenger on that side, more like a left-hand drive car would normally be, primarily for that reason, so you could actually work. And so I don't know that there's a right answer, but there are some downsides to driving from the center of the car. The next thing that you contend with when you take this car anywhere is, of course, the bystander retention. And one of the greatest things about the route that White Label Events planned for this tour is that it was all up in the Smoky Mountains, generally out in the middle of nowhere. And so most of the time we were driving without anyone else around. But because the color on this one is so subtle, the same way that my LP640 and Verde Draco is not quite as in your face as Orange or Verde Ithaca, the car sneaks up on people, unlike a red on red on red Bugatti. So this you immediately notice and the response happens. This you don't immediately notice, and then when you do, you drive off the road. And we saw some unbelievable responses that are obviously a bit concerning, because people would start pulling across in front of you and just stop to start looking at the car, or they would be looking in their rearview mirror and veer off this way. And so you have to constantly be aware of all the people around you and how they might react when they realize what's behind them.
So the next issue is luggage compartment. Now, this car, compared to some of the more modern supercars, it does have a little more luggage space, but when you're traveling for over a week, two people, it gets a little crowded. And we'll show you how the luggage space looks like. So to open it, you have a lever here next to the engine lever. You open that up and this door kind of falls down. In here, we can see we have the luggage space. Now we do have just enough space to have a detail kit and some emergency tools in case we didn't need them. Thankfully, we didn't need them this trip. But when you're traveling for a week, this gets crowded. So thankfully, the event did have a support vehicle for us that was able to take our backpacks, our luggage. But when you're traveling, like I said, for a week and a half with two people, it is a little bit of an inconvenience with the storage.
Now, another issue when you're traveling with an interesting car, either at the request of law enforcement or potentially customs or importation, is to see the VIN. And there are no external visible VINs on a McLaren F1, at least on this one. There's a lot of variation through the 106 car production run. And so there's not one on the dash, there's not one on the door jamb. This sticker here you could access, but it would be easy to forget that it's there. But as Pedro has looked around the car, he only found one place that you could really see a stamped VIN.
So if we go on the right hand side of the driver, we've made these floor mats just to give it extra protection. You remove this, and to access the VIN, you have this piece of carpet that's velcroed to the floor. Now if we lift this up carefully without pulling that, you have the VIN stamped there. Now in a priceless car like this, it is a little bit worrying that somebody's just going to come in here, open the door and start tearing carpet apart. So it is a bit of an inconvenience knowing that the VIN is under all these carpets. They have to get in the car, and it's not just like a simple automobile where it's on the door frame. So unlike modern supercars where you typically tend to have a little bit of frunk space, this doesn't. In the McLaren F1, you pop this open and you have various different things in here. You have your fluid reservoirs for the brake, the clutch, as well as the windshield wiper fluid. You have the famous Kenwood 6CD holder, and you also have your air conditioning unit, as well as a tow hook. Thankfully, the car behaved and we didn't need that. And another interesting fact is the car comes with its own quick access toolkit that you can see here made by Facom. Another issue we encountered, and it's, I think any video of any McLaren F1, you'll be able to notice this, it's the brake. So these brakes, when they were designing it, they tended to use carbon ceramic, but at the time most of the technology wasn't the best, so they ended up using steel on steel. Now, if you don't get them up to temperatures and you're just cruising along a normal highway and you come to a stop where you're in a normal rural area where there's some stop signs, some stop lights, and you come up to a stop, it will let you know that you are applying the brakes, because the brake squeal and that squeakiness, I mean, it is ear piercing. But it's a typical issue with the McLaren F1, as well as the brake. Actually, the braking of the car. If the brakes are not really up to temperature, you got to be cautious on how far you're traveling behind another car, as well as speed. So it is a little bit of an inconvenience, is the brake sound, the squeal, as well as the brake pressure.
Now, one of the most well-known facts about the McLaren F1's engine bay is, of course, that they have lined it in gold. And this is the recently replaced and updated Tavarish tape gold throughout it. And it is the best heat reflector that you can put. And that seems kind of like overkill. Like, why would we need that? Well, we do, because every time you would address any part of this car after it's been driven for any amount of time, it gets insanely hot. Both of us burnt our fingers trying to show the people that were enthusiastic about the cars the engine bay, because especially these vanes here and anything that you would use to open this up are extraordinarily hot. Now, it also is fun that this doesn't have a latch. It just sits there, and it becomes latched when you put this down and it presses here. And so all the latches do is open this, and that's how it works. Now, at one point on Tail of the Dragon, Pedro was driving up with a couple other passengers, and so I was driving another participant's Senna, which was an unbelievable car for that road. And I got to see something I didn't know was even a part of this car from right behind it, that there is gold under the air brake. Up more? Ah, look at that! That is the coolest thing to see as you are right behind it. Now, also, when the air brake is up, you've got these giant air inlets, and these are actually taking that clean air down to the rear discs. As we open it, we're looking around like, why would it vent air from the discs out here? We thought it might be for more downforce and things like that, but that is in fact what it's doing. It's dumping cooler air onto the brakes they're still gonna squeak, but they're gonna work better. Now, there was one car in our convoy that had the factory HDK kit, the high downforce kit, which deletes this rear wing, at least in its movement. And so when you had the larger wing, you actually had two separate inlets that accomplished the same function. And they would bring air straight back, down in, and to your brake disc. Now, of course, those are a lot of setbacks and a lot of issues, and it begs the question of, is it the best road trip car on the planet? And the answer is both obviously not and absolutely yes. Today's video is brought to you by Bridgestone. I am absolutely loving my Bridgestone Jeweler AT Ascent tires that I've got on the Cayenne. I've got a set of their Taranza Prestige tires coming for the family car, and I love the Bridgestone family of products. And I've got a link in the description below for you to check out the latest from Bridgestone and thank them for their support of VinWiki.